Imagine walking into your bedroom on your wedding night, expecting a private moment of celebration, only to find a team of state-authorized strangers, a silent physician, and a wooden figure draped in heavy cloth waiting for you. You weren't told about the mandatory physical documentation. You weren't warned about the witnesses who would stay all night. And you certainly weren't prepared for the anatomical idol in the corner that everyone else in the room already knows the purpose of. In a few minutes, that cloth will be lifted, and you'll realize your marriage isn't a romantic union at all, but a high-stakes legal transaction where your body is the property being inspected. This was the hidden reality of ancient Rome. A series of rituals so disturbing that later historians tried to scrub them from the record, leaving only fragments of a truth they hoped the world would eventually forget. Today, we are peeling back the saffron veils and flowery myths to reveal the clinical, cold-blooded machinery of Roman matrimony that controlled every breath of a young bride's life. While the public saw festive songs and scattered walnuts, the private reality involved legal transfers of human authority that treated women with less sentimentality than a plot of farmland or a herd of livestock. From the terrifying role of shadowy deities to the medical verification of assets, we're uncovering the 22 horrifying wedding myths that turned out to be disturbingly true. Forget the Hollywood version of Roman romance, because we are diving into a world where privacy was a crime, submission was a religious requirement, and the state held a permanent seat at the edge of the marriage bed. 1. In the year 89 CE, an 18-year-old bride named Livia Tirsa discovered that her wedding was actually a cold-blooded legal transfer of manus power. This ancient Roman concept literally translated to being in the hand of her husband, granting him total legal ownership over her. She wasn't gaining a partner, she was changing owners like a piece of high-end real estate. 2. Before the ceremony even began at dawn, Roman brides had their hair specifically parted with a sharpened spearhead to symbolize their complete domestic subjugation. This wasn't just a weird fashion choice in first-century Rome. It was a ritualistic reminder that the bride was being conquered by her new household. The spear used was often one that had tasted blood, serving as a grim warning of the lethal authority her husband now held. 3. While the wedding procession looked festive with its flame-colored veils, the crowd was actually shouting fescennine verses, crude, explicit, and deliberately humiliating insults. These obscene songs were intended to avert the evil eye by making the bride feel so small that the gods wouldn't bother cursing her. Imagine walking through the streets of Rome while hundreds of neighbors scream graphic, embarrassing suggestions about your impending wedding night. 4. Once the bride reached her new home, she was forcibly lifted over the threshold, because stumbling was considered a catastrophic omen that could curse the entire lineage. This famous tradition actually echoed the rape of the Sabine women, a dark founding myth where Romans literally kidnapped their first wives. By carrying her, the husband was reenacting a historical abduction, proving that the bride was entering his house as a captive rather than a guest. 5. Inside the house, the bride was immediately greeted by the pronuba, an elderly matron whose sole job was to supervise the physical consummation of the marriage. This wasn't a supportive mother figure. She was a state-sanctioned witness who ensured that every intimate act followed strict legal and religious protocols. In wealthy households, she would literally stand at the bedroom door to verify that the transfer of property was being executed correctly. 6. The most terrifying object in the Roman wedding chamber was a 4-foot-tall wooden idol of the god Mutunus Tutunus, kept under a shroud. This deity was Rome's shadowy god of initiation, and his presence was mandatory for any marriage involving the elite political classes of the empire. Before the husband could even approach his bride, she was required to perform a physical ritual with this statue to prove her total submission. 7. Roman brides were legally forced to straddle the phallic statue of Mutunus Tutunus in front of the pronuba and other selected wedding witnesses. Early Christian writers like St. Augustine were so horrified by this blessing of fertility that they tried to burn every record of its existence. It wasn't just a symbolic touch. The bride had to physically mount the idol to offer her virginity to the gods before her husband took his turn. 8. Beyond the religious rituals, a professional physician with a leather pouch of instruments was often stationed in the atrium to conduct a virginity audit. In Rome, A bride was considered a financial and political asset, and her untouched status had to be medically documented for the marriage contract to hold. If the physician found any discrepancy, the bride's family could be sued for fraud, and she would be cast out as damaged goods. 9. The Roman wedding bed, known as the lectus genialis, was intentionally placed in the atrium where it could be partially viewed by the household and its guests. Privacy as we understand it simply didn't exist in 2nd century Rome. The act of producing an heir was a public concern that required social validation. Keeping the door open was a way to ensure no trickery occurred and that the union was physically completed according to the law. 10. During the actual consummation, the bride was forbidden from showing any signs of pleasure or enthusiasm, as this was seen as a sign of a dishonorable character. Roman law valued pudicitia, or extreme modesty, meaning a good wife was expected to remain as passive and stoic as a statue during the night. If a woman seemed too experienced or eager, it could be used as evidence in future divorce courts to prove she was unfaithful. 11. To ensure the legitimacy of future heirs, the pronuba would often inspect the bedsheets the following morning to provide physical evidence of the bride's initiation. This was a standard legal requirement in Rome to finalize the transfer of the woman's dowry. Without this bloody proof of purchase, the husband's family could technically refuse to pay the agreed-upon sum to the bride's father. 12. If a Roman bride tried to resist any part of the wedding night rituals, her own mother was expected to tell her that struggle only makes it harder. Compliance wasn't just encouraged, it was a survival strategy in a society where a disobedient wife could be legally executed by her husband's family council. The psychological breaking of the bride was a deliberate part of the ritual, ensuring she knew her place in the hierarchy. 13. Wealthy Romans often had slaves stationed just outside the bedroom door to provide warm, scented water for purification immediately after each stage of the ritual. This wasn't for the bride's comfort. It was to fulfill religious cleansing requirements that prepared her for the next round of witnesses or medical inspections. Every time she was washed, it was a reminder that her body was a vessel for the state's future soldiers and politicians. 14. The legal age for a Roman girl to be forced into these wedding rituals was as young as 12 years old, though 15 to 18 was more common. At an age when modern kids are starting middle school, Roman girls were being subjected to medical exams and anatomical idols to secure political alliances. Their childhood ended the moment they put on the tunica recta, a straight white dress that marked them as ready for the marriage market. 15. Even the walnuts thrown at the bride during the procession had a dark secondary meaning. They symbolized the dropping of childhood toys and the end of personal freedom. In ancient Rome, walnuts were the marbles of the time, and throwing them away meant the bride was legally surrendering her right to play or be a child. She was now a matrona, a woman whose only function was the grim business of managing a household and producing heirs. 16. Roman law allowed for a specific type of marriage called usus, where a woman became her husband's property simply by living with him for a year. To avoid this total loss of rights, some women would escape for 3 nights every year to reset the legal clock on their own ownership. But for elite brides like Livia, this wasn't an option. The formal rituals of the wedding night made the ownership permanent instantly. 17. The presence of a flamen or priest during the wedding night was common to ensure that no religious taboos were accidentally broken during the consummation. If the couple performed the act on a nefasti, an unlucky day, the entire marriage could be declared void by the Senate. This meant the most intimate moments of a couple's life were governed by a complex calendar of holy and unholy days, monitored by strangers. 18. Divorce in Rome was surprisingly easy for men, but for a woman, it often meant leaving her children behind with the husband. Because children were legally the property of the father's bloodline, a mother had no right to them if the marriage dissolved. This horrifying reality forced many women to endure years of abusive rituals just to maintain a connection to their own sons and daughters. 19. In cases of high-level political marriages, the witnesses to the wedding night often included members of rival families who were there to verify the peace treaty. The bride wasn't just a wife, she was a living human contract, and her physical submission was the signature that ended wars or formed alliances. If she failed to complete the ritual, the peace treaty could be torn up, leading to immediate political chaos or even bloodshed. 20. The Roman physician Serenus wrote detailed manuals on how to prepare a bride's body for the wedding night, treating the process like a surgical operation. These second-century texts suggest using specific oils and physical techniques to ensure the bride wouldn't fail her medical exam. It reveals a society that viewed female physiology through a purely mechanical lens, devoid of any empathy for the psychological trauma involved. 21. When Christianity took over the empire in the 4th century, they were so repulsed by the statue of Mutunus Tutunus that they declared the ritual a satanic practice. They didn't just stop the tradition, they actively hunted down the wooden idols and smashed them, trying to erase the shame of Rome's pagan past. This is why we have so few physical remains of these rituals. The church spent centuries pretending the horrors of the wedding night never happened. 22. And despite the absolute control the state held over their bodies, Roman women were expected to maintain a dignified silence about their experiences until the day they died. Livia Tirsa lived to be 60, but like millions of other Matronas, she likely never spoke a single word to her daughters about what happened behind the shrouded cloth. The silence wasn't a lack of trauma. It was a universal social contract that kept the machinery of the Roman Empire running smoothly.